Each year, the IRS and the Fed fraudulently take possession of billions upon billions of Americans' income, often harassing and even imprisoning those citizens who refuse to comply. The special interests that control these institutions have used misleading information, complex statutory laws, and intimidation to scare us into thinking we are powerless to stop this fraud. The process that got us into this mess has taken place over several generations and has been institutionalized to the point that we take it for granted that we should pay tax on our income to the federal government. But that simply is not true. It is a lie that has been slowly and systematically woven into the fabric of our society by the money interests that would enslave our nation and our children to enrich themselves. But you may ask, what's so bad about a national bank with its notes considered legal tender? We have that now. Well, in 1967, Congressman Wright Patman, another chairman of the House Banking Committee, put it like this. He said on the floor of Congress,
"In the United States today, we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government, then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System, operating the money powers which are reserved to Congress by the Constitution."
Furthermore, despite repeated attempts by Congressman Patman and others, the Federal Reserve Bank has never been fully audited. Who in the world could hold enough power to thwart 80 years of attempted legitimate audits from members of the United States Congress? Let's see. First, note that the Federal Reserve is a private corporation. Perhaps a look at some of its founders will give us some needed insight into its power. They included J.P. Morgan, the Mayer A. Rothschild Company, and Paul Warburg, among others. It's worth noting that the Rothschild family also was instrumental in creating the first national bank of the United States, the one that was eventually abolished by President Andrew Jackson. Here's what Baron M.A. Rothschild had to say about controlling our money supply back in the 18th century. He said,
"Give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes the laws."
Paul Warburg, a German-born financier who emigrated to the United States, masterminded creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. He basically ran the bank until World War II, when the press revealed that his brother Max was running German finances under Adolf Hitler. Warburg quietly resigned the post. J.P. Morgan, another founder of the Fed, and early America's own robber baron, is believed to have used his great wealth to engineer the devastating financial panic of 1907. Warburg, Morgan, and their successors have gotten away with this fraud for more than 80 years, since President Wilson unwittingly signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. That same year, Secretary of State Philander Knox announced that enough states had voted in favor of the 16th Amendment to allow it to be adopted as part of our Constitution. The 16th Amendment, you may recall, gives the federal government power to collect an income tax. It provides that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. Since then, we have learned that the so-called adoption of this amendment was a total sham. In the 1980s, two patriotic Americans, Red Beckman and Bill Benson, chartered a plane and examined documents related to voting on the 16th Amendment in each of the 48 states existing in 1913. The authors found, and have documented in their book, The Law That Never Was, that only a few states actually voted in favor of the measure, not nearly enough to legally adopt it as law. But Treasury Secretary Knox, for whatever reasons, ended up lying about the state's votes and fraudulently announced adoption of the measure. Despite this chicanery, the people remained vigilant, and between the years 1913 to 1915, fewer than 2 million Americans volunteered to assess themselves for the income tax service. But the bankers wanted more, and they kept pushing. They pushed us into one world war, and then a second. By 1933, they either had intimidated or bought off enough members of the government to get their collection arm, the Internal Revenue Service, a monopoly to collect income taxes from the American people. It is clear to all taxpayers that the function of the IRS is to administer collection of a progressive or graduated income tax. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps a paraphrase of the 16th Amendment or a part of the IRS code? Sure it does. It is also the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. Isn't it rather frightening that one of the central tenets of communism has come to play such a pivotal role in how our country is run? Well, it gets worse. The Communist Manifesto was designed to bring about a state with centralized control of credit, transportation, communications, and the means of production, among other things. And as shocking as this may sound, the reality is that all 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are fully implemented today in the United States. Plank 1 calls for a property tax designed to encourage state ownership of land. In America today, if you don't pay the tax, you lose the land. Plank 2 is our income tax. Plank 3 calls for abolishing rights of inheritance. Today in America, families struck by the tragedy of a parent's death are forced to sell the family home to pay the exorbitant inheritance taxes levied by the IRS. Plank 4 mandates confiscation of property from those who disagree with the system. The IRS is infamous for seizing people's cars, their homes, and businesses at the first sign of non-compliance. Plank 5 decrees centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Sound familiar? It's our Federal Reserve System. Plank 6 calls for centralization of communication and transport in the hands of the state. The Federal Communications Commission regulates everything in the air, and the Interstate Commerce Commission just about everything on the land. Plank 7 would empower the state to control agriculture and production. Each year in America, farmers are paid millions of dollars not to produce, and the bounty of our federal lands is sold to special interests for pennies on the dollar. And through excessive regulation, the government has come to control just how and what our factories produce. Plank 8 involves equal liability of all to labor and establishment of industrial armies. Well, there's no question about our right to labor, and our unions certainly qualify as industrial armies. Plank 9 dictates the combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries and the gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country. In America, huge agribusinesses have foreclosed on the family farm. And with regard to abolishing the distinction between town and country, we ask, what's more communist than a condominium? Plank 10 mandates, among other things, free education for all children in public schools. Good or bad, we now have all 10 planks in force right here in America. If only Senator Joseph McCarthy had turned his attention on the IRS.